2 decades after the Second World War, Soviet-American tension had become a way of life. Fears of nuclear conflict between the two superpowers peaked in 1962 in the wake of the Cuban Missile Crisis. In 1960s, the USSR seemed likely to match America's nuclear arsenal. So both were left with two choices of either to continue with the arms race and cause mutual destruction to each other, or to slow down the competition. So they moved towards detente in early 1960s. The term detente is one of the most widely used and debated in the contemporary literature of international relations. Yet it is also one of the most ill-defined and inadequately conceptualized notions. It's a French word meaning relaxing or easing. Most often, the term is used for a phase of the Cold War. The term detente is used to symbolize the relaxation of tensions or strained relations between the Soviet Union and the West, especially through the medium of verbal communication. This phase was marked by the years 1969 to 1974, and it was promoted by Richard Nixon, who was the serving president of United States at that time, Henry Kissinger, an American politician and diplomat who served as United States Secretary and was National Security Advisor under the administration of Richard Nixon, and Leonid Brezhnev, who led the Soviet Union as Secretary General in the years 1964 to 1982. It began in 1969 as a core element of the foreign policy of US President Richard Nixon. It was an effort to avoid nuclear escalation. It was symbolized by disarmament and arms control measures. In 1968, Richard Nixon was elected as the president in the US. It was in his hands that the US moved to the period of detente. In 1968, both the superpowers saw that the arms race had reached an unsafe point for their countries in the world. The conflict in Berlin and Cuba played a large role in this recognition, especially for the USA, as the Cuban Missile Crisis happened right below their noses.
Last Friday in Moscow, we witnessed the beginning of the end of that era, which began in 1945. We took the first step toward a new era of mutually agreed restraint and arms limitation between the two principal nuclear powers. With this step, we have enhanced the security of both nations. We have begun to check the wasteful and dangerous spiral of nuclear arms, which has dominated relations between our two countries for a generation. We have begun to reduce the level of fear by reducing the causes of fear for our two peoples and for all peoples.
In words of Henry Kissinger, detente is the search for a more constructive relationship with the Soviet Union, reflecting the realities of competition with the imperative of coexistence. It encourages an environment in which both can regulate and restrain their differences and ultimately move from competition to cooperation. Kissinger, in one of his interviews, stated the objectives of detente. These are: the first and foremost objective of detente must be to reduce the dangers of general nuclear war. Second objective is to reduce direct conflict in areas of vital importance to both countries. Third is to create links that will provide incentive for moderation. And the fourth is to reduce conflicts in the peripheral areas.
We believe that peace is at hand. We believe that an agreement is within sight. It is inevitable that in a war of such complexity, that there should be occasional difficulties in reaching a final solution.
Now, what were the regions or factors which constituted the context within which Soviet-American detente took place? So the first and foremost was the changing structure of international politics. In the post-Second World War, the political landscape of the international politics changed drastically. The world became bipolar, and the two superpowers, that is United States and Soviet Union, dominated the international power structure. These changes had a substantial impact on the evolution of American foreign policy in the late 1960s, and that had significantly altered the post-Second World War global structure. Second is the political and economic recovery of many nations from the dislocation of the Second World War. Third is the emergence of the Third World War, the emergence of many new states and their growing desire to preserve their independence and to avoid becoming simple battlegrounds for the Cold War. Fourth is the passing of American strategic superiority and the achievement of a rough strategic parity by Soviet Union. Fifth is the development of a deep Sino-Soviet split. The changes in the nature of the communist challenge with the passing of Moscow's monolithic control of international communist movement and the rise of competing centers of communist doctrine, power and practice. Sixth is the increasing constraints on American resources available to support an interventionist foreign policy and the acutely felt need of the American people to shift their priorities to more urgent domestic problems. The last one is the American involvement in the Vietnam War. It was perhaps the most significant in bringing to the fore the need for a major reappraisal of the past US foreign policy assumptions. Vietnam War was not only proved to be the turning point in the post-war United States foreign policy thinking, but it also brought home the realization that America's role as the world's imperial power had reached the limits of its expansion. Vietnam War not only tore apart the fabric of US domestic consensus, which had hitherto supported an interventionist foreign policy, but it also cast grave doubts on the very wisdom and philosophy of such a foreign policy. It brought to the fore the need for a major reappraisal of the past US foreign policy assumptions. So it was the most significant constituent because of which Soviet and American detente took place. It, it was a turning point in the post-war US foreign policy. Thus, it was a logical and inevitable result of American undifferential globalism and global resist aggression tendency. So the responsibility to sustain the American imperial role in a changed international environment fall upon the Nixon-Kissinger administration, which upon taking office in 1969 announced major changes in the US foreign policy.
Do you feel the people are united behind you, Mr. President? As far as the people are concerned, I have no judgment on that. All that I can say is that I know that I did what I believed was right, and what really matters is, as far as the people are concerned, is whether it comes out right. If it comes out right, that's what really matters.
Nixon's invasion of Cambodia produced violent protests on American campuses. At Kent State University, National Guardsmen shot 4 students dead.
Now, what was US interest in detente? So the first and foremost interest was to avoid nuclear war. Second was to secure for the US a key role in the functioning of the global balance of power. Third one was the fear of mutual destruction. And the fourth one was to limit the nuclear arms race. Now, Soviet Union's perspective on detente. First one was the creation of structure of peace and a stable international order. Second is the hope of economic benefits. Third is to avoid nuclear war. Fourth is to limit the nuclear arms race and to create a more favorable condition for peaceful socialist and communist construction. Now, Nixon and Brezhnev shaking hands after signing the SALT Treaty on May 26, 1972. The institutionalization of U.S.-Soviet detente took place at the Moscow summit between Nixon and Brezhnev in May 1972, when a number of agreements, include SALT, Strategic Arms
In
Limited Treaty,
1971,
took
Nixon
place.
and Brezhnev reconfirmed the rights and responsibilities of the four powers for the future of Berlin and Germany with the Berlin Agreement. The agreement re-established ties between broken-up Berlin by improving travel and communication. After the Cuban Missile Crisis, the USA and the U.S.SR signed several arms control agreements, amongst which was the first Strategic Arms Limitation Talk, or SALT I. Signed in 1972, it covered three areas of agreement. 1. The Anti-Ballistic Missiles Treaty. 2. The Interim Treaty. And 3. The Basic Principles Agreement. These restricted missile possession and laid down the rules for the conduct of nuclear war and developed. Discussion continued regarding the ending of the arms race, and negotiations for SALT II began in 1974. A final agreement was reached in 1979, and it limited the MITRVs that SALT I didn't limit and banned testing and the development of certain types of weapons.
By the end of the decade, however, cracks had begun to form in the precarious US-Soviet relationship. The leadership of the two nations signed the second SALT agreement but did not ratify it, although both countries voluntarily agreed to the provisions for reduced limits on the strategic weapons for years thereafter. The breakdown of detente in the late 1970s stalled progress on arms control. Ultimately, the US and Soviet Union had different visions of what detente meant and what it perceived to entail. The time when the Soviet Union invaded Afghanistan in 1979, the spirit of cooperation had been replaced with renewed competition. Thank you for watching.